The first successful laser was developed by Theodore Maiman, an American physicist, in the year 1960. Laser is considered as one of the outstanding achievements of modern science due to its innumerable and ever-increasing number of applications in all walks of human life. Laser is the acronym of Light Amplification by Stimulated Emission of Radiation, and the name is given following the name of maser, which was first developed in the year 1954. This maser actually means microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, which is intended to amplify microwaves in electromagnetic spectrum or electromagnetic radiation. Laser is considered as one of the outstanding achievements of modern science due to its important properties, and the main properties of laser is its directionality, monochromaticity, coherence and brightness. In order to understand the theory of laser emission, we have to be familiar with interaction of matter with radiation. While considering the interaction of matter with radiation, we have to be familiar with three different phenomena. They are absorption, spontaneous emission, and stimulated emission. First of all, we can deal with this absorption. Absorption means when light energy falls on an atomic system, the atoms absorbs light energy. Light energy, that means photons are absorbed by the atoms and they are taken to higher energy levels. In this energy level diagram, E1 represents ground state, E2 represents excited state, and N1 and N2 represents number of atoms in ground state and excited state respectively. And the photon energy is h nu, where h nu is equal to E2 minus E1. Then the rate of absorption of radiation is directly proportional to number of atoms in the ground state or in the starting level. So we can write the expression as dN1 by dt. Absorption is directly proportional to N1, or it is equal to W12 into N1, where W12 is a proportionality constant and this constant is known as absorption probability for transition from level 1 to level 2. But W12 is equal to B12 rho, where B12 is known as Einstein's coefficient of absorption and rho is radiation density. Radiation density means it represents number of photons crossing per unit area per unit time. Finally, our expression changes to dN1 by dt absorption equal to B12 N1 rho. This equation represents a rate of absorption of radiation. Second type of interaction of matter with radiation is spontaneous emission, and in this case we are assuming that more number of atoms are in excited state. When the atom is taken to excited state, its energy is large and it is unstable, and it comes to the ground state with the emission of photons. So if this process is spontaneous, there is no triggering force and all the photons emitted will be differing in phase, wavelength and direction and polarization. Hence the emitted beam is highly incoherent. That is the important property of spontaneous emission. All the beams, all the photons emitted are traveling in different direction. Their phase will be different. Their state of polarization will be different, and highly incoherent beam is produced in spontaneous emission. Here again E1 and E2, ground state, excited state respectively, N1 and N2, number of atoms in ground state and excited state, and rate of spontaneous emission is directly proportional to number of atoms in the starting level, that is in the excited state. Hence, we can write the expression as dN2 by dt spontaneous directly proportional to N2, or it is equal to A into N2, where A is a proportionality constant and it is known as Einstein's coefficient of spontaneous emission. Hence, our final equation is dN2 by dt is equal to A into N2. The third type of interaction of matter with radiation is stimulated emission. In this stimulated emission, these atoms in the excited state can exist in their energy levels for comparatively longer time, because these excited energy levels are having comparatively less energy, so the lifetime of atom is much more. And here, in presence of a stimulated radiation, in presence of a suitable photon, the atoms are stimulated or triggered to emit identical photons and coming to ground state. They are coming to their ground state. And the photons emitted as a result of stimulated emission is identical in all respects. They are traveling in the same direction, they are having the same phase, same state of polarization, same wavelength as that of stimulating radiation. Hence, a large number of photons identical in all respects is emitted. That means the emission, when stimulated emission occurs, all the photons are coherent in nature. That is the important property of stimulated emission. Now, coming to the mathematical part, the rate of stimulated emission. Rate of stimulation, when we discuss about this rate of stimulated emission, actually it represents number of atoms coming to the ground state in unit time. When we consider emission, emission is starting from excited state. So the starting level is excited state, and rate of stimulated emission means total number of atoms coming from excited state to ground state in unit time. That is represented by dN2 by dt, since the starting level is excited state. Since it represents stimulated emission, this rate can be represented as dN2 by dt stimulated, that is represented by the suffix STI. So dN2 by dt stimulator is directly proportional to number of atoms in the starting level, that is directly proportional to N2. Now, changing the proportionality constant, dN2 by dt stimulated is equal to W21 into N2, where W21 is proportionality constant, which is known as stimulated emission probability, and this W21 is equal to another constant B21 into rho, where B21 is known as Einstein's coefficient of stimulated emission, and rho, as mentioned earlier, it is the radiation density. Radiation density means number of photons striking per unit area per unit time. In stimulated emission, this triggering pulse need not necessarily come from outside. It can be any spontaneously emitted radiation. Spontaneously emitted photon can act as triggering pulse or stimulating photon. And because this photons emitted as a result of stimulated emission is highly coherent, this laser is produced. As the name suggests, laser is produced due to stimulated emission. Stimulated emission is the basic phenomena behind laser emission. Now, the relation between Einstein's coefficient. In the previous section, we discussed about spontaneous emission, stimulated emission, and absorption, and rewrote the equations corresponding to their rates. And in that expressions, we introduced Einstein's coefficient, and now we are going to derive the relation between Einstein's coefficient. And the relation between Einstein's coefficient is very important in the theory of laser emission, because from this relation we can discuss the conditions which are essential for the production of laser. So first of all, consider the rate of absorption. Rate of absorption is represented by dN1 by dt. dN1 by dt because absorption is starting from the ground state and the number of atoms in ground state is represented by N1, and rate of absorption means number of atoms taken to excited state from the ground state in unit time. So it is represented by dN1 by dt. dN1 by dt absorption is equal to B12N1 into rho. That is the rate of absorption discussed in the previous section. Similarly, rate of stimulated emission is given by dN2 by dt stimulated is equal to B21N2 into rho. And rate of spontaneous emission is given by dN2 by dt spontaneous equal to A into N2. Here B12, B21 and A are known as Einstein's coefficient. And experimentally it is found that B12 is equal to B21. So it can be represented as B in general. Hence our expressions can be changed to dN1 by dt absorption is equal to Bn1 rho and dN2 by dt stimulated is equal to Bn2 into rho. That is B12 and B21 are replaced by B. Now, at equilibrium, total absorption is equal to total emission. So, we can write the equation as rate of absorption is equal to rate of spontaneous emission plus rate of stimulated emission. So, when we substitute the values, now we can write it as dN1 by dt absorption equal to dN2 by dt stimulated plus dN2 by dt spontaneous, and substitute the values from our equation. The equation becomes Bn1 rho is equal to Bn2 rho plus A into N2. Taking the B terms together, this equation changes to B into N1 minus N2 into rho is equal to A into N2. And on rearranging, this expression changes to rho. Rho is equal to A N2 by B into N1 minus N2. Now dividing the whole equation by N2, it becomes rho is equal to A by B into 1 by N1 by N2 minus 1. In statistical mechanics, there is an important relation which is known as Planck's radiation law, where radiation density is given by rho nu is equal to, rho is a function of frequency, so rho of nu is equal to 8 by h nu cube divided by c cube e raised to h nu by kt minus 1. And in statistical mechanics, the number of atoms in excited state and ground state are related through an equation. N2 is equal to number of atoms in excited state is equal to number of atoms in ground state N1 into e raised to minus h nu by kt. That means N1 by N2 now becomes e raised to h nu by kt. So our equation 915 in this slide, the equation 915 becomes rho is equal to A by B into 1 by N1 by N2 can be replaced by e raised to h nu by kt minus 1. So comparing these two equations, the equation 950 now in our slide and equation 916 in our slide, we can write A by B is equal to 8 by h nu cube divided by c cube. When you compare these two equations, left hand side is the same, this radiation density, and in right hand side e raised to h nu by kt minus 1 is the same, and A by B is replaced by 8 by h nu cube by c cube. So the relation between Einstein's coefficient is given by A by B is equal to 8 by h nu cube divided by c cube, but nu is equal to c by lambda, and when we substitute this value for frequency, the equation changes to 8 by h divided by lambda cube. This relation shows that a ratio of spontaneous to stimulated emission varies with inverse cube of wavelengths. Now, the importance of relation between Einstein's coefficient. It is already mentioned that the relation between Einstein's coefficient is very important in the theory of laser. So the ratio between spontaneous to stimulated emission is rate of spontaneous emission divided by rate of stimulated emission, and it is equal to, as mentioned in the previous section, it is A. Spontaneous emission rate is A into N2 and stimulated emission rate is B into N2 into rho. That means the ratio becomes AN2 divided by BN2 into rho, which is N2 cancels and the remaining is A by B into rho. That is shown in your slide. Ratio of spontaneous emission to stimulated emission is A by B rho, and it is equal to, from our equation A by B rho from the previous slide, it is shown in the equation A by B rho is equal to N1 by N2 minus 1. And the relation between, from the relation between N1 and N2, N1 by N2 is equal to E raised to H nu by Kt. So it becomes E raised to H nu by Kt minus 1. And laser emission is a result of stimulated emission. Hence, to emit laser, the stimulated emission must dominate over spontaneous emission. So, A by B rho must be small. Spontaneous emission rate must be very small compared to stimulated emission rate. From this expression, we can conclude that in order to make stimulated emission dominant over spontaneous emission, the following conditions must be satisfied. The first one is radiation density. Since A by B rho must be small, radiation density must be very large. To make radiation density very large, in laser system we use usually we use two parallel mirrors, and using these parallel mirrors multiple reflection is possible and hence radiation density can be increased. And in our expression, this A by B rho is equal to N1 by N2 minus 1. A by B rho must be small. That means N2 must be greater than N1. That is the second condition. The first condition is radiation density large, and second condition is number of atoms in excited state must be very large compared to number of atoms in ground state. And this situation is known as population inversion, and population inversion can be achieved by different methods of pumping. And the third one is A by B must be small. A by B must be small means spontaneous emission coefficient divided by stimulated emission coefficient must be small, and this can be achieved by choosing the excited state as a metastable state. A metastable state is selected as an excited state. Metastable state means an energy level which is in between excited state and ground state. So these are the three important conditions to produce laser. The first one, large radiation density. Second one, number of atoms in excited state very large compared to number of atoms in ground state. And third one, A by B must be small. Next is basic components of laser. So some important components of laser system is given here. The first and important component is lasing medium. In order to in order to produce laser, a suitable medium is required, and this suitable medium is known as lasing medium. Usually, lasing medium consists of two types of material. One is known as host and the other is laser active material. Host is very large in amount and laser active material is found in very small quantity. And the host provides suitable environment for this laser active material, and actual lasing transition occurs only for laser active material. While selecting this laser active material, we should be very careful because a metastable state must be present in this laser active material. For example, when we consider ruby laser, the essential lasing medium is a ruby crystal. Ruby crystal means it is aluminum oxide crystal which is doped with chromium ions, and the concentration of chromium ion is about 0.05 to 0.58 percentage of aluminum oxide. Here, aluminum oxide acts as the host material and chromium ions act as laser active material. So, laser medium is combination of host and laser active. Host is the main component. It is the major amount of this lasing medium is host material, and laser active material is found in small quantity, but actual lasing transition occur for the laser active material. And second condition is population inversion must be achieved. It is already mentioned in the previous section that important condition to achieve laser is number of atoms in excited state must be large compared to number of atoms in ground state. And the condition in which number of atoms in excited state very large compared to number of atoms in ground state is known as population inversion. That means it is the inverted population. Actual population means in normal state more number of atoms are found in ground state and number of atoms in excited state is very less. But inverted population condition means the reverse is the case. Number of atoms in excited state is very large compared to number of atoms in ground state. That means by adding some energy is given to the system by some means and more atoms are taken to excited state, and this situation is known as population inversion. And the phenomena by which population inversion is achieved, the process by which extra energy is given to the system is known as pumping. That means through pumping, that is the third criteria, pumping. Pumping is the process by which population inversion is achieved. So there are different methods by which population inversion can be achieved. There are different types of pumping. They can be for optical pumping, electrical pumping, electron beam pumping, heat pumping, or chemical pumping. In optical pumping, as the name implies, additional energy is given in the form of light. And this is usually used in solid state laser. Laser can be classified as solid state laser, gas laser, etc. depending on lasing medium. If the lasing medium is a solid, it is solid state laser. If the lasing medium is a gas, it is known as gas laser. If the lasing medium is a semiconductor, then it can be called as semiconductor laser. So in solid state laser, usually we use optical pumping. That means light energy is used to take more atoms to excited state. The second one is electrical pumping. In electrical pumping, an electric discharge is used to take more atoms to the excited state, and this is usually used in gas lasers. And the third one is electron beam pumping. Electron beam pumping means fast moving electrons are used to take more atoms to excited state, and this is usually used in semiconductor lasers. And the last two, heat and chemical pumping. Heat pumping means, as the name implies, here heat energy is used to take more atoms to excited state. And in chemical pumping, chemical reaction, the energy released during chemical reaction is used to take more atoms to excited state. So these are the different types of pumping. Now the metastable state. Another important criteria for the production of laser is metastable state. While selecting this laser active material, a metastable state must be present. Metastable state means an energy level which is in between ground state and excited state. Usually the lifetime of atom in excited state is very small. It is of the order of 10 raised to minus 8 seconds. When a metastable state is taken, the lifetime of atom in metastable state is very large. It is around 10 raised to minus 3 seconds. And lasing transition starts from this metastable state. So metastable state is an essential condition for the production of laser, and metastable state usually act as the upper lasing level. And the last one is optical resonator. It is very important part of this laser, and the properties of laser, main properties of laser is due to the presence of this optical resonator. Usually this optical resonator consists of two parallel mirrors, and the direction and the wavelength of laser is decided by this optical resonator. Optical resonator is a very important part of a laser system. It usually consists of two parallel mirrors. They are facing each other, and it sets an optic axis which defines the direction of laser beam. The direction which is perpendicular to the plane of these two parallel mirrors defines the optical axis. And usually the laser active material in solid state laser, this laser active material is taken in the form of a cylinder whose length is 10 times that of its diameter, and it is taken in between these two mirrors, and they are aligned. This length of the cylinder is aligned along the axis of this resonator. Now here we are using two parallel mirrors. One mirror is fully reflecting, it is completely reflecting surface. The other one is made partially transparent, or it is provided with a small hole, and this hole or partially transparent mirror can act as the laser output. And the schematic diagram of this optical resonator is shown here. The part 1 shows fully reflecting mirror, part 2 represents partially reflecting mirror, and from part 2 we can take laser output. Laser output is shown as part 4, and part 3 is a cylinder which is kept in between these two mirrors, and its length is along the axis of the optical resonator, and it is the lasing medium. In optical resonator, any spontaneously emitted photon which is traveling along the optic axis of the resonator is allowed to travel a large distance through the lasing medium. This is achieved by using two parallel mirrors which is present in our optical resonator. So when this photon strikes the mirror which is present in optical resonator, it gets reflected. It travels in opposite direction. Again, it strikes the mirror in the opposite direction. It gets reflected, and this process continues, and it is allowed to travel a large distance through this lasing medium. When this photon travels through the lasing medium, it can trigger an atom in the excited state to emit an identical photon. Hence, there will be two photons, and these two photons can trigger two other atoms in the excited state to emit two more photons. Hence, there will be four photons. These four photons trigger four other atoms. Again, 8 photons will be there, and this multiplication process continues, and highly intense beam can be taken out from this optical resonator. Now, the optical resonator selects only those photons whose half integral multiple of wavelength form the length of the resonator. So the wavelength is selected by the optical resonator, and direction is also selected by the optical resonator. And the photons emitted spontaneously in all other directions will die out due to collision. Hence, the optical resonator selects the desired photon state for amplification and guides the radiation parallel to the axis of the resonator. This optical resonator, that is the optical resonator, selects the wavelength of laser beam, and also its directionality or direction is defined by the optical resonator. This optical resonator makes the emission process triggered by uncontrolled spontaneous emission into stimulated emission. That means spontaneously emitted photon is triggering stimulated emission, and finally the output is due to stimulated emission. Both the stimulated emission process and optical resonant cavity action give the unique features of laser, namely high coherence, high degree of coherence, directionality, monochromaticity, and high beam intensity. And the quality of this optical resonator is defined by the dimensions of the optical resonator. Dimension means it can be size of the mirrors, transparency of the output mirror, absorption of the medium, population of the levels, etc. And these factors together are known as quality factor or Q factor of the optical resonator. So the important function of this optical resonator is it can convert a spontaneous emission, uncontrolled spontaneous emission, to stimulated emission, and the emission of laser becomes possible due to the action of optical resonator. It defines the direction of the laser beam, wavelength of the laser beam. So due to this optical resonator, the important properties of laser arises. Ruby laser. So in this section we have to study about two lasers, mainly two lasers. The first one is ruby laser and the other one is helium neon laser in detail. And here the first one is ruby laser. Ruby laser is the first invented laser, and this laser was invented by an American physicist, Theodore Maiman, in the year 1960. And it is an example for solid state laser. Here the lasing medium is in the form of solid, so it is known as solid state laser. And in this ruby laser, lasing medium, as mentioned earlier, lasing medium is a combination of host material and laser active material. Here the host material is aluminum oxide and laser active material is chromium ions. And the lasing medium is known as ruby crystal. It is a highly precious pink colored crystal, and this ruby crystal is nothing but aluminum oxide crystal which is doped by chromium ions, and the concentration of chromium ion is around 0.05 to 0.5 percentage of aluminum oxide ions. That means its concentration is very less compared to aluminum oxide. The aluminum oxide provides a suitable environment and lasing transition occurs for chromium ions only. Now construction of a ruby laser. Ruby laser, ruby crystal is taken in the form of a cylinder of length around 10 centimeter and diameter around 1 centimeter. And two ends of this cylindrical rod is polished flat and parallel to one another. One end of the cylinder is silvered and it acts as fully reflecting surface, and the other end surface is coated with some suitable dielectric material so that it becomes partially reflecting. That means a cylinder is taken and its two end surfaces are polished, and one surface is made fully reflecting by silver coating and the other surface is partially reflecting by dielectric coating. That means these two end surfaces provides the optical resonator action. Now surrounding this ruby crystal, helical shaped xenon lamp is present, and this xenon flash lamp is used to provide pumping. That means here the pumping provided in ruby laser is optical pumping, and suitable reflectors are also present which will focus the light into the ruby rod. That is about the construction part. Construction part means ruby crystal, two end surfaces polished and one is fully reflecting, the other one is partially reflecting. That means they act as optical resonator. Xenon flash lamp which is surrounding this ruby crystal which provides the necessary optical pumping, and reflectors are used to concentrate this light into the ruby crystal. And when we consider the important parts of this laser, lasing medium, ruby crystal, that means combination of aluminum oxide and chromium ions, pumping, optical pumping which is provided by xenon flash lamp, optical resonator, two end surface of this ruby crystal polished and silvered, one surface which is coated with dielectric material on the other end surface. These two end surfaces act as optical resonator.
Ruby laser. In this type of laser, the lasing material is a solid. A ruby laser consists of a flash tube, a ruby rod and two mirrors. One of the mirrors is partially silvered. The ruby rod is the lasing medium and the flash tube energizes the medium. The flash tube fires and injects light into the ruby rod. The light excites atoms in the ruby. Some of these atoms emit photons. Most of these photons move in a direction parallel to the axis of the ruby rod, and they bounce back and forth from the mirrors. As they pass through the crystal, they stimulate emission in other atoms. These photons come out through the partially silvered mirror as a monochromatic single-phase and columnated laser.
Now the working of ruby laser. When we discuss the working of ruby laser, it can be explained with the help of energy level diagram of lasing medium, laser active material. Here the laser active material is chromium ions. So with the help of chromium ion energy level diagram only we can explain the working of ruby crystal. So draw the energy level diagram. The energy level diagram is shown in figure. In energy level diagram, wavelength, reciprocal of wavelength is plotted along y-axis, and when energy levels are drawn, here only 4 energy levels. The chromium ion is having 4 energy levels, and these 4 energy levels are E1, E2, E3 and E4. They are represented as E1 to E4 in our energy level diagram. And here E1 represents the ground state, E2, E3 and E4 are broad bands, they are excited states, and E2 is a doublet. Doublet means it consists of two closely spaced energy levels, and this E2 act as metastable state. E1 ground state, E2 metastable state, E3 and E4 act as excited states. And when high potential difference is applied, this capacitor first charges, and when it discharges, xenon flash lamp is activated, and xenon flash lamp emits white light. That means composite light is emitted from this xenon flash lamp. And from this composite light, these chromium ions can absorb two particular wavelengths which are in the blue region and yellow green region, because in blue region 0.4 micrometer, which corresponds to energy level difference between E1 and E4, and yellow green region, the wavelength which is nearly equal to 0.55 micrometer, it corresponds to energy level difference between E1 and E3. So the atoms which absorb 0.4 micrometer jumps to energy level E4, and the atoms which absorbs 0.55 micrometer jumps to E3. That means atoms in the ground state can absorb two particular wavelengths which are from blue and yellow green region of the spectrum. They jumps to E4 and E3. The atoms are taken to excited state, and these atoms in the excited state are very unstable, so they emits excess energy and comes to the energy level metastable state E2. That means through non-radiative transition, the atoms in the excited state jumps to E2. Non-radiative transition means this excess energy is given to surrounding molecules as their vibrational energy. That means this energy appears in the form of heat. When an atom jumps from excited state to lower energy level, two types of transition can occur: radiative and non-radiative. Radiative means it comes to the lower energy level with the emission of photons, and non-radiative means it comes to the lower energy level by giving out excess energy in the form of heat energy or any other energy, say other than light energy. Here the transition from excited state to metastable state is non-radiative. This excess energy appears in the form of heat energy of surrounding molecules, and these atoms in this metastable state, when they reaches to energy level E2, this metastable state is having comparatively long lifetime, so the atom exists in this metastable state, and population inversion is achieved for the energy level E2. So in presence of a suitable photon or any photons which are spontaneously emitted, in presence of this suitable photons, these photons can be any spontaneously emitted photons. These atoms in the excited atoms in the energy level E2, that means metastable state, are stimulated to jump to ground state with the emission of photons. Since E2 is a doublet, when they jump from E2 to E1, two wavelength arises. They are 0.693 micrometer and 0.694 micrometer. Both are in the red region of visible spectrum. So the light emitted from ruby crystal, ruby laser is red light. And this transition from E2 to E1 results in laser beam of two different wavelengths, 0.693 micrometer and 694 micrometer. So this working of laser is explained with the help of energy level diagram. Energy level diagram is very important in the explanation of working of ruby laser. And when here the energy levels are E1, E2, E3 and E4. And this ruby laser is an example for 3-level laser, because 3 sets of transition is possible. The first set is from ground state to excited state. Ground state E1 to E3 or E4, that is the first set of transition. Second set of transition is from excited state to metastable state, that is non-radiative transition. E2, E3 and E4. From E3 and E4, atoms jump to metastable state E2 through non-radiative transition. And final one is from metastable state to ground state, that is the third one or last one, that is the lasing transition. So the lasing transition is from E2 to E1. So when we return to ground state, 3 sets of transition is possible: ground state to excited state to metastable state to ground state, and the last one is lacing transition. So this laser is an example for 3-level laser, and here in lacing transition E2 act as upper lacing level and E1 act as lower lacing level. While considering the advantages of this ruby laser, ruby laser is having all the advantages for all the properties of laser. That means it is highly coherent, highly intense, highly monochromatic. All these properties are present for this ruby laser. And disadvantages, mainly the first and important disadvantage is output is spiky and it is irregular. Output is spiky and irregular. That is one of the important disadvantage of ruby laser. And the second one is efficiency of this ruby laser is very low. As an input we are giving kilojoules of energy and it is used in a millisecond, and at the output we are having few tens of joules of energy. So input is very large, thousands of joules of energy is used, and tens of joules of energy is released at the output. That means efficiency is comparatively low. These two are the important disadvantages of ruby laser. Another important disadvantage is when atom jumps from excited state to metastable state, excess energy is appearing as heat energy of the surrounding molecules. So some cooling system is required to take the heat energy developed during the operation of laser. That is the third one. So 3 disadvantages we can mention here: low efficiency, output spiky and irregular, and the third one is some cooling system is required to take the heat energy developed during the working of this laser system. Second laser that we have to study in detail is helium neon laser. Helium neon laser is a gas laser. That means lacing medium is in the form of gas, and this is the first gas laser which is developed by a scientist called Ali Javan. Ali Javan and his co-workers of Bell Telephone Laboratories of USA developed this laser. And in this laser, lacing medium is a combination of helium and neon gas, which is taken in the ratio 10:1. Since it is a gas laser, the pumping method used is electrical pumping. Optical resonator action is provided by 2 spherical mirrors which are kept at the 2 ends of discharge tubes. So regarding the essential requirements of lacing medium, the essential components of laser are satisfied as described. They are satisfied as the first component is lacing medium, mixture of helium and neon gas is taken in a discharge tube. Second essential component, pumping. Population inversion is actuated through pumping, and pumping is actuated by electrical pumping. And the third one, optical resonator, is actuated with the help of 2 spherical mirrors which are fixed at the 2 ends of this discharge tube. Now the construction part of this helium neon laser. So when you describe a laser, first give an initial description, who invented this type of laser, and how the basic components are actuated. After that, give a description of construction of laser. So in construction of laser, it is a gas laser, and here a mixture of helium and neon which is taken in the ratio 10:1, and it is filled in a glass discharge tube whose length is around 80 centimeter and diameter is 1 centimeter, and pressure is maintained at 10 torricelli. 10 torr pressure is maintained, and the ends of this discharge tube is closed with the help of 2 oblique quartz windows. When this normal of this quartz window is drawn, it makes polarizing angle with the axis of the tube, so that the laser beam which is coming out through this quartz window becomes completely polarized. Now, in order to achieve optical resonator action, 2 mirrors are attached. 2 spherical mirrors are attached at the ends of this discharge tube. They are marked as part 4 and 5. One is completely reflecting and the other one is partially reflecting. They act as optical resonator, and a high potential difference is applied within the discharge tube. And for cooling, some cooling arrangement is present in the laser system in order to take the heat developed during the laser production. Now the working of helium neon laser. Similar to ruby laser, this working of helium neon laser can also be explained with the help of energy level diagram. And in helium neon laser, we have already mentioned that lasing medium is combination of helium and neon, and helium is found in large quantity, neon is found in small quantity, 10:1 ratio. Helium acts as host material. It provides the suitable environment for the lasing transition to occur, and neon is the laser active material where lasing transition occurs. And here we have to consider the energy level diagram of both helium and neon. And the energy levels of helium is represented by F1, F2, F3, and neon energy levels are shown as E1, E2, E3, E4, E5 and E6. In helium, F1 represents F1 represents ground state, F2, F3 represents excited state. And in neon, E1 is the ground state and the remaining energy levels are excited states. And the important property of this helium and neon is the F3 energy level of helium coincides with E6 energy level of neon, and F2 energy level of helium coincides with E4. F2 coincides with E4 and F3 coincides with E6. That is very important in the combination of helium neon gas. When electric discharge occurs, when a high potential difference is applied at the ends of this gas discharge tube, helium atoms, some of the helium atoms and neon atoms get excited, and excited helium atoms goes to the energy levels F2 and F3, and neon atoms goes to the energy levels E4 and E6. But the helium atoms in the excited state, they collide with neon atoms in the ground state and transfers its complete energy to neon atoms, and it goes to the ground state. Excited helium atoms collides with neon in ground state, transfers its complete energy to neon atoms, and helium atoms go to the ground state and neon atoms are taken to excited state. And this energy transfer is known as a resonant collision energy transfer. Energy transfer is through collision, and this energy transfer occurs because two energy levels are coinciding. The energy levels F2 coincides with E4 and F3 coincides with E6. Because of this collision, energy transfer is possible, so it is known as a resonant collision energy transfer. So when neon atoms absorbs energy from helium atoms in F2, they goes to energy level E4, and when neon atoms collide with helium atoms in F3, they goes to energy level E6 of neon atoms. These are shown by curved lines in your energy level diagram. Through collision, energy is transferred from helium to neon, and more neon atoms are taken to excited state. And through this resonant collision energy transfer, population inversion can be achieved for the energy levels E4 and E6 of neon atoms. So here E4 and E6 act as upper lacing level for neon atoms. From E6, it is acting as one of the upper lacing level. From E6, atoms can jump to energy level E5 or they can jump to energy level E3. They are shown by double lines in your energy level diagram. So E6 to E5 is possible and E6 to E3 is possible, which is lacing transition. And from E6 to E5, it jumps to atoms from E6 jumps to energy level E5 through the emission of laser. Similarly, E6 to E3, there is again emission of laser of different wavelength. And from E4 is again a lower lacing level, upper lacing level. From E4, a transition possible is from E4 to E3 transition is also possible. So 3 sets of laser beam is possible from helium neon laser. 3 different wavelengths are emitted due to E6 to E5, E6 to E3 and E4 to E3. And the corresponding wavelengths are due to emission, due to de-excitation from E6 to E6 to E5, the wavelength, the corresponding wavelength is 3.39 micrometer. Now from E4 to E3, the corresponding wavelength is 1.15 micrometer, and due to transition from E6 to E3, the corresponding wavelength is 0.63 micrometer. E6 to E5, 3.39, E4 to E3, 1.15 micrometer, and these two transitions are in infrared region, while the other one, the third one, which is due to transition from E6 to E3, it is 0.63 micrometer wavelength is emitted, and it is the red region of visible light. So two wavelengths are in IR region and one wavelength is in visible region, and it is red light. And from these three different wavelengths, we can select the desired wavelength by selecting due to desired wavelength can be selected due to optical resonant cavity action. Using optical resonant cavity action, from these three wavelengths, lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3, the desired wavelength can be selected. Now the atoms are in the higher energy levels E5 and E3. From E5 and E3, the atoms jumps to next energy level E2 through non-radiative transition, and it is shown by slanted line in your energy level diagram. So E5 and E3 to E2 transition is non-radiative. Now the last one, from E2, the atoms jumps to E1 again through non-radiative transition. Hence, helium neon laser is an example for 3-level laser. Total set of transition is 4 sets of transitions are possible, so it is known as 4-level laser. The first transition is from ground state to excited state. Ground state to excited state means E1 to E4 and E6. That is the first set. And second set of transition is lasing transition. That means E6 to E5 or E3 or E4 to E3. That is lasing transition. That is the second set of transition. Third set is a non-radiative transition, which is from E5 and E3 to E2. That is the third set. And the fourth set, that is the last set, is E2 to E1. That is from starting from ground state, we are reaching the ground state itself, and there are 4 sets of transition. Hence it is known as a 4-level laser beam. And regarding the advantage and disadvantage of this helium neon laser, the advantages are this beam is highly plane polarized, highly coherent, and it has all the properties of laser beam: coherent, monochromatic, intense. All the properties are there, polarized and highly coherent, and it is a continuous output. Continuous output is obtained from helium neon laser, and its efficiency is low, which is the important disadvantage of helium neon laser. Low efficiency, that is a disadvantage. Advantages: monochromatic, highly coherent, highly intense, continuous, and highly polarized. These are the advantages of helium neon laser. The third type of laser that we have to discuss in our chapter is semiconductor laser. It is not required in detail, its qualitative idea is only required. And the semiconductor laser, as the name implies, the lasing medium is a semiconductor. It consists of a planar p-n junction formed by two heavily doped semiconductor with its end faces perpendicular to the plane of the junction. One pair of end faces are made parallel and polished to serve as reflecting surfaces which act as optical resonator. The other two end faces are left with a rough finish to suppress any unwanted radiation. Here, the polished surfaces are not coated with any reflecting material, since the semiconductor is having high refractive index and its reflectivity is very large, which is required for our purpose. In semiconductor laser, as the diodes are heavily doped, the Fermi level EFP of p-type semiconductor falls within the valence band, and EFN, the Fermi level of n-type semiconductor, falls within the conduction band. And these two Fermi levels lie in the same horizontal line in the absence of any voltage. And when a bias voltage is applied, these Fermi levels are become separated and it is represented by delta F. And when a bias voltage is applied, what happens is the electrons in the conduction band of N region flow towards depletion region. Similarly, holes in the valence band of P region also move towards the depletion region. And in the depletion region, these electrons and holes recombines, and during the recombination of electrons and holes, energy is emitted, and the emitted energy is equal to band gap energy, and the frequency corresponds to band gap energy. That is a working principle of semiconductor laser. That means when bias voltage is applied, electrons from N region move towards the depletion region, holes from P region also move towards the depletion region, and in that depletion region they recombine each other, and during this recombination energy is emitted, and the frequency of this radiation is corresponding to the band gap energy. And the main semiconductor used, the PN junction used for this purpose is gallium arsenide. And now research is undergoing to construct semiconductor laser using heterostructures like aluminum, gallium arsenide, etc. Holography. Holography is the technique of recording an object with its three-dimensional aspects and reconstructing the three-dimensional image is known as holography. And this technique is developed by a scientist called Dennis Gabor in the year 1948. And the word holography is derived from two Greek words, holos and graphos. Holos means complete and graphos means writing. That means the entire details of object is recorded. Usually we use photography to produce the image of an object, and in photography the light reflected by the objects are focused onto the surface of a film by some suitable image forming devices like lens. Here only the amplitude of the reflected light is recorded, hence we cannot record the depth of the object. Only two-dimensional aspect is recorded in photography, but in holography we can record the depth also. That is the importance of holography compared to photography. In photography we are recording the two-dimensional aspects, and in holography we can record the three-dimensional aspects. That means depth is also recorded in holography. In holography we are able to record the three-dimensional aspects because here we are recording the amplitude and phase of reflected light, and phase recording helps to record the depth of the object. That is the main difference between photography and holography. Photography amplitude only is recorded, two-dimensional aspects can be recorded in photography, but in holography along with the amplitude, phase is also recorded, and we can record the three-dimensional aspects. In holography we are recording the interference pattern between light reflected from the object and original light coming from the original source is recorded, and this recorded interference pattern is known as hologram. And in order to view the three-dimensional aspect of image, we have to read the hologram, and this reading or reconstructing the hologram, reconstructing the image is done with using diffraction grating method. And in this purpose, for the construction and reading the hologram, we require highly coherent beam, and hence holography was we are able to achieve hologram or produce hologram practically only after the invention of laser, since it requires a highly coherent beam. Now, recording a hologram. How we can record a hologram? In order to record a hologram, we require highly coherent source, and here we are using laser. And light coming from a laser source is divided into two parts. One part is allowed to fall on the photography plate directly, and the beam which is falling on the photography plate directly is known as reference wave. And the second part is allowed to fall on the object whose hologram is to be constructed. And using suitable reflecting mirrors, this light is allowed to fall on the object on all parts of the object. And the light falls on the object, gets scattered from the object, and this scattered wave again falls on this photographic plate. This wave coming after getting scattered from the object is known as object wave. That means two types of waves are falling on the light sensitive medium or photographic plate. And in your diagram, the part 1 represents the object wave, part 2 is the object, part 3 is the object wave, and part 4 is the photographic plate. So on part 4, on the photographic plate, 1 and 3 is falling. Reference wave and object wave are falling, and they are derived from the same laser source. That means they are highly coherent, hence sustained interference pattern is produced on the photographic plate. This photographic plate, the produced negative after processing, that means after developing, fixing and washing, the photographic plate after developing, fixing and washing, the obtained negative is called the hologram of the object. The hologram very much looks like an unintentionally exposed negative. With naked eye we cannot detect any information, or we cannot get any information about the object from this hologram. That means in order to read the hologram, or in order to understand the image stored in the hologram, there is another process which is known as reading a hologram. That means in hologram recording, actually the interference pattern produced by this object wave and reference wave is recorded on the photographic plate, and this photographic plate is developed, fixed and washed. The obtained negative is known as hologram. Now, reading a hologram. Reading means it is the process of reconstructing the three-dimensional image from the hologram. In order to read the hologram, or in order to reconstruct the information or reconstruct the three-dimensional image from the hologram, we require a coherent beam which is identical in all respects as that of our reference wave, and this beam is called a readout wave. And this readout wave is allowed to fall on this recorded hologram at the same angle as did the reference wave. That means it should fall on the hologram at the same angle as reference wave is incident on the photographic plate. When it falls on this recorded hologram act as a diffraction grating. Hence the phenomena is known as diffraction grating method. Initially it is mentioned that hologram can be reading of hologram is based on diffraction grating method. This hologram is acting like a diffraction grating, and when the readout beam falls on this diffraction grating, two sets of diffracted beams are produced. One set is a divergent beam and the other one is a convergent beam. This divergent beam produces an image which is on the same side of object. To an observer looking against the direction of this divergent beam, this hologram acts as a window through which he can see the virtual image, which is an exact three-dimensional replica of original object. When we change the angle of observation, we can see all the details of this object and even the objects behind the actual objects. And when we observe the convergent beam, it can produce a real image which is symmetrically placed with respect to virtual image. Virtual image is produced by the divergent beam and real image is produced by the convergent beam. Real image is placed symmetric with respect to virtual image. But this real image appears to be inverted in depth, and hence it is known as pseudoscopic image. Real image, in this case, real image is acting like a pseudoscopic image because it is inverted in depth. And when we illuminate the hologram with a readout wave, which is proceeding in opposite direction as that of our reference wave that we used during the recording process, these images gets the position of these two images gets inverted. That means a real image is formed in the original position of the object and virtual image is formed symmetric with respect to this real image. That means virtual image appears as inverted in depth and it becomes the pseudoscopic. That means when readout wave is traveling in the same direction as that of reference wave, virtual image is produced at the same position of our object and real image is placed symmetric with respect to virtual image and it is inverted in depth. That means here real image is pseudoscopic. And in the second case, if the light readout wave is falling on the hologram in opposite direction as that of our reference wave, the condition becomes reverse. Real image is produced at the same position of object and virtual image is produced on the opposite side and it is placed symmetric with respect to real image. It is inverted in depth. Virtual image is inverted in depth and it can be called as pseudoscopic image. And in hologram, we can reconstruct the three-dimensional aspect of the object and we can produce a wave which contains all the information contained in the reflected wave. Hence the name holography. Hence the name holography becomes meaningful. That is complete writing. All the informations are recorded in the hologram. Now applications of holography. Important applications of holography are: it can be used for information storage. Using a hologram can store large amount of information. That is the first application. Next one, it can be used for data processing. It can be used for pattern recognition, encoding and decoding of information, associative retrieval of information. For all these processes we can use holography. Third one is holographic cinema. Using holography we can construct three-dimensional cinemas. And fourth one is white light holograms. Now the advantages of holograms over photographic images. As mentioned in the beginning, in photography we can record the two-dimensional aspects and in hologram we can record the three-dimensional aspects. That is the first advantage. Three-dimensional aspect is recorded in hologram while in photography only two-dimensional aspect is recorded. Second one, in photography plate only one image can be stored, but in a hologram several images can be recorded at a time. Now information storage capacity is very large in hologram. And the third one, in photography, if the photograph is partially or otherwise destroyed, it is permanently, the information is permanently lost. But in case of hologram, even if it is split into a number of pieces, from a single piece we can retrieve all the information stored in the hologram. That is another advantage of hologram over photographic image. So three advantages of hologram over photographic plates are: first one, three-dimensional aspect is recorded; second one, information storage capacity is very large; and the third one, if a hologram is destroyed into number of pieces, from a single piece itself we can reconstruct all the information which is stored in our hologram.